First thing you need to ask folks when you start working with them, whether it's community leaders or other non-government organizations, relief organizations, other, is ask them how are they doing and what can you do to help, and listen to them first rather than tell them, here's what I'm here, here's what I'm going to do, let's get to work. Take some time, listen to them, try to understand their perspective, and see how you can best deliver aid to where they're at.
So I want to dig into that for a minute. Why is that so important? What would happen if you just jumped in and said, I'm here to do some work, I'm here to help you, I'm going to get started?
Well, first, I think certainly when you're doing this in somebody else's backyards, for example, and that can be in the backyard in Louisiana, or in the Northeast right now, where the flooding's occurring, or in Haiti, it's understanding the culture and the people, and understanding how you can best support them and help them, rather than assuming that you know the answer to better than they do, and being able to listen to them. And I think this is a part of having an empathetic ear as a leader, but not assuming you know the answer and the solution before you get a good sense of the situation.
This week's show is a really special show. I'm really excited about this show. We're going to talk about leading through crisis. But what makes this show so special is I'm having my good friend and former guest on the show, Ken Keene, come on the show. He's a retired lieutenant general, and he's going to specifically talk about his experiences, not only leading Haiti through recovery from an earthquake in 2010, but then his next assignment after that, when he went into Pakistan about a month after Osama bin Laden was killed, and had to mend and lead through crisis with some of those very sensitive relationships with Pakistan. So Ken is going to help guide us. He's got some amazing, simple points and principles that we can all use as leaders leading through crisis. But you're going to hear some amazing stories. So listen real close to what Ken has to say. I took lots of notes, and so when we're finished, I'll share with you all my points, but you're in for a real treat.
The Workplace Therapist Show is sponsored by the Leadership Foundry. Bringing a cutting-edge, real-world approach to leadership development, the Leadership Foundry partners with each client organization to create a custom-tailored experience, virtual or in person, that combines innovative leadership content, world-class facilitators, and one-on-one coaching to ensure your leaders have everything they need to grow and thrive. To find out more and to design your one-of-a-kind program, visit myleadershipfoundry.com.
Ken, really good to have you back on the show. It's always good to have you on the show. I was thinking about it. I think this is our third or fourth time I've had you on the show.
Yeah.
I've had you on a bunch.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, and so normally, and I'm going to ask you for the listeners that haven't had the pleasure of listening to your prior shows, I'm going to ask you to share a little bit about kind of your background in just a minute. But normally we talk about kind of your experiences in the military and all the kind of the life lessons you learned as a leader. And I still want to talk about that today, but I really want to focus on crisis leadership.
Okay.
Because I know you have a lot of experience there, and I think everybody can relate to some level of crisis today and how we kind of lead through that. So for my listeners that are new to you, share a little bit about your background. What has kind of been your journey that ultimately got you to the seat you're in today?
Well, I entered the Army in December 1974. A day after I got married to my college sweetheart, and we're still married today. So she's been right there with me through the entire journey. I spent 38 years in the Army. I didn't enter the Army with that intent. Like many of us, you start a career with a short-term focus. I thought I would spend about 4 years in the Army. I had gone to college, met a Vietnam veteran who sort of coached me into joining Army ROTC by offering me a scholarship. I took it, and that was a commitment of 4 years to come into the Army. I intended to go back, maybe back into my home communities of Kentucky or somewhere in Kentucky and teach high school math, which was what my college major was in. But what I found in the Army, because of the opportunities it provided, was I really enjoyed the people, the leadership opportunities, the growth opportunities, and my first assignment, I had never traveled west of the Mississippi, or I'd never traveled really much east of Kentucky. And so my first assignment was Fort Ord, California on the West Coast. So that was an adventure of itself, driving across country with my wife. And then the Army just gave me opportunities. My next assignment was the Republic of Panama. And I just really loved what I was doing, and most importantly, the people I was doing it with. I spent most of my career in Special Operations Unit, Special Forces. I spent 4 tours in the 82nd Airborne Division, and then I spent most of my time with the 75th Ranger Regiment, where I was able to command both in the 82nd as well as the Ranger Regiment, a battalion, and then I commanded the 75th Ranger Regiment. After I was very fortunate enough, obviously, the Army kept promoting me in spite of my mistakes and failures I made, and I got promoted to General Officer in 2003, and I spent about 9 years as a General Officer. And as a General Officer, I really spent most of my time leading larger organizations, both Army type of organization, but I spent a lot of that in Latin America and Europe. I led Joint Task Force Haiti when I was the Deputy Commander of U.S. Southern Command following the 2010 earthquake. I spent my last tour of duty in Pakistan, 19 months. Obviously, this was in 2011, 2013, dealing with, working a relationship with Pakistan, and obviously working with the commander of the Afghanistan forces, NATO forces. We call it ISAF because of all the border issues we have. So, from leading small special forces, 12-person A-teams, to infantry formations, which is what I was, an infantry officer, I had the opportunity to see a lot of great teams and organizations, because a lot of the organizations I were in were what we would consider high-performing organizations. We just saw that here recently with the withdrawal of Afghanistan. The unit that was called upon were some of those very formations, the 82nd Airborne Division, a lot of our special operations units. They're some of our nation's very best. So I had the privilege of serving on those teams, and you experience high-performing teams, and you experience when teams don't perform up to their expectations. So I got to see all of that through the course of my career in the military.
Every time I talk to you, I always learn something new about you. I actually didn't know that you were in Pakistan for 19 months.
Yeah.
And kind of had that part of your journey and experience. So normally when we've talked in the past, we've talked about leadership. We've talked about some of the lessons you learned along the way, learning to kind of, not do and lead rather than do, and all the amazing stories you've told around that. We've talked about high-performing teams. So today I want to talk about leading in crisis. So I don't know if it sounds like you've been tasked to go into situations that were crisis and help to kind of lead through that, lead either rebuilding efforts or security or safety efforts. So I don't know if there's a particular one that stands out for you as a good starting place, but I would love to hear your perspective of what's the first step a leader needs to do when they are tasked with, there's a crisis and we've got to kind of set the ship straight. What's the first step?
Well, I mean, obviously the one that, sort of the crisis situation that stands out the most to me is my experience in Haiti. But that occurred after I'd been in the Army for about 34 years.
Yeah.
And so I would say, how our leader responds to a crisis a lot of times is based upon how much equity you've put into the bank, or how many rocks you've put in your rucksack up to that point in terms of experience, in terms of leading through or participating in different situations where you've had to deal with crisis and you've learned from others around you. And so at that point in my career, I had obviously experienced a lot of different situations. And so I think the first thing that I draw upon is, for a leader, is being able to lead yourself first and foremost when you're confronted with a crisis. Being able to know yourself well enough to control your emotions, but to also show enough empathy to those that are suffering the most around you to be able to step forward and lead. What I saw in Haiti, I happened to be in Haiti on the day of the earthquake on January 12, 2010.
You were there the day of the earthquake.
Right. As it turned out, I was at the time I was the deputy commander of U.S. Southern Command, which is headquartered in Miami. That's responsible for Latin America and the Caribbean. I was on what was supposed to be about a 7-day trip through the Caribbean and Central America, talking to ambassadors and our partner nations on their preparations for the upcoming hurricane season, which generally starts in January. And I just left the Dominican Republic. Of course, Haiti is on the western side of the island of Hispaniola, Dominican Republic on the eastern half of the island. I just left the Dominican Republic after spending about a day and a half there, and I landed in Port-au-Prince on the morning of January 12th, about 9 a.m., linked up with the ambassador, and we spent the day together. And at the time, Haiti had a large UN presence, United Nations presence of a stabilization and security mission, and the U.S. had a small footprint there, led by our U.S. Ambassador Ken Merton. So I was there just saying, if you have a major storm, which often happens in Haiti almost every year, if you are going to ask for U.S. military support, which would be incumbent upon U.S. Southern Command to lead that effort, what would it be, and how could we help the most? So we were prepared for that. And at the end of the day, I was with him at his residence, sitting on the back porch when this earthquake occurred. And it was immediately shook us to the point where we stumbled off the back porch. We were waiting for a reception that he was going to hold about 6 p.m. The earthquake occurred at 4:53 p.m. And so we turned around, and his residence, which is a large home that was built in the 1920s by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in Haiti, we could visibly see it swaying back and forth in the shaking of the earth, and we heard collapsing structures all around us. And so I think first and foremost, what I learned, and particularly in the first 72 hours following a crisis, is your ability to reach out to those immediately that you're dealing with, to see how you can help and what you need to do in the immediacy of the crisis to surveil what's happening and how you can move forward. And what I saw in the ensuing days in working with leaders at every level was particularly Haitian leaders, stepping up in the ashes of that earthquake. For example, the Minister of Health lost his building, his car, his cell phone. 60% of his healthcare workers were injured or killed. But in the days after the earthquake, he was out there doing his job, trying to console the family members or those that work for him, but also lead the relief effort, which he was a central part of. Yeah. Obviously, because of the death and destruction that was caused by this earthquake, over 220,000 people were killed and over 300,000 were severely injured. So I learned from others, but for myself, it was, seeing the glass half full as best you can, talking to the Haitians, listening more to them than telling them what to do, listening to, what their needs were, where they were at. And I would urge all my leaders as they came to Haiti to end that response. We ended up having over 22,000 servicemen and women from all of our services respond. And I would tell them the first thing you need to ask folks when you start working with them, whether it's community leaders or other non-government organizations, relief organizations, other is ask them how are they doing and what can you do to help, and listen to them first rather than tell them, here's what I'm here, here's what I'm going to do, let's get to work. Take some time, listen to them, try to understand their perspective, and see how you can best deliver aid to where they're at.
So I want to dig into that for a minute. Why is that so important? What would happen if you just jumped in and said, I'm here to do some work, I'm here to help you, I'm going to get started? Well,
first, I think certainly when you're doing this with in somebody else's backyards, for example, and that can be in the backyard in Louisiana, or in the Northeast right now, where the flooding's occurring, or in Haiti. It's understanding the culture and the people, and understanding how you can best support them and help them, rather than assuming that you know the answer to better than they do, and being able to listen to them. And I think this is a part of having an empathetic ear as a leader, but not assuming you know the answer and the solution before you get a good sense of the situation. And I found, I found that in particular in those situations, particularly in a crisis, that's important that you do that. Culture was a big issue, obviously, when you're going into a country, whether it's Haiti or Afghanistan or Iraq or any other country, is understanding the cultural component of it.
Yeah. Okay. So again, I learned something new about you every time I'm with you. I had no idea you were there when the earthquake happened.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So first 72 hours, you're listening, really leading with empathy, asking how you can help. And you just saw a lot of people step up in that situation. Is there ever a time as a leader leading through crisis that you need to help focus other leaders around you? Maybe they're a little rattled and you've got to focus them, or you've got to kind of inspire them. Has that ever been something?
Sure. I think in particular in crisis, you have to recognize at some point you just need to take charge and provide clear direction and focus to move forward. And I would say, in the hours right after the earthquake, I saw that many times. I had one of the members of my team was killed in the earthquake. It was in Hotel Montana, which is about a block away from where I was at, with two other members of my team, and he was killed, and two were severely injured and rode down the earthquake. And one of them was immediately evacuated. And I think in the immediacy of it, we had to just jump in, and others had to jump in and try to save and try to rescue folks. And in cases where you just sometimes you have to step up and start giving direction to immediately address a crisis. It's like coming up on a car accident and see the flames blazing on a car after an accident. You may not have the time to wait and discuss what action to take. You might need just to take action, and I think that's certainly the case in some crisis. That you need to balance with how long you're going to take to take in information, listen to folks versus take action. And many times, I saw this in meetings in Haiti in the months after the earthquake. Is at the end of a meeting say, hey, we've heard enough. We need to take action here, and we need to do it. And I used to, in Haiti, I had the privilege of spending a couple of days with President Clinton and President Bush, who had come to Haiti. They had formed a foundation together to help the Haitian people. They came to visit for a few days. I happened, while I was there with them, I got a picture that I have hanging on my wall with President Clinton and Bush and me standing between them. I used to show that picture on occasion when I would go to a meeting and we would just talk without any resolution, without any direction forward. And I put the picture up and I would say, if these two world leaders can come to Haiti working together to provide solutions, surely we can make a simple decision here to move forward. We've debated enough. Let's make a decision. Sometimes somebody in the room has to step up. And this isn't about who's in charge. I certainly wasn't in charge of any of that. And many times it wasn't me saying that. Many times it was someone else, another ambassador or another leader saying, hey, we spent 2 hours discussing this, and we're no closer to a decision than we were when we walked in this room. We're wasting time. We need to move forward.
Yeah. So something else that you were talking that sparked for me, I think, given you already have 34 years of experience going into this, you probably didn't fall into this trap, but I know a lot of leaders can get impatient in certain situations, trying to drive through and clean up,
Yeah.
crisis situations. And there's a lot of context around that. I mean, there's limitations with Haiti. There may be limitations in Afghanistan. There may be, they may not go at the pace you want. So how can leaders realistically set their expectations for navigating through crisis?
Yeah, well, I certainly was subject to losing patience in not only in that situation.
I would not want to see you lose patience.
Yeah,
then.
and so and sometimes that's where I found having others around you to maybe remind you that the situation requires a little bit more introspection and thought, and that they can sense that you're getting on the edge and you're wanting to do that. So having people give you candid feedback and know you well enough that's around you that are willing to do that, I think it was helpful. But to get at your question, I think you do need to understand the limitations and the constraints of the folks you're trying to do, and this is where I think really understanding your partners that you're working with, those you're trying to support. In our cases in Haiti, it was the Haitian government, knowing how far you could push and what constraints of some of the organizations you're working with. I mean, we had a lot of NGOs that were trying to help, but they had boards that governed how much they could do and where they're going to work. And I might want them to go into one area and do something and not clearly understand. I don't understand why you just can't make a decision and go into this community and start providing medical assistance or set up a water and food distribution point there. And they said, well, we have some constraints because of our funding or whatever. We'll have to work through that. And I said, well, we don't need that in 3 days. We need that like tomorrow. And so understanding that well enough, so being able to tailor what I was asking them so it was realistic for what they could deliver was something I had to learn, certainly in Haiti. And then knowing how to work with folks, so where you could work with them and you had common interest. And this is something I later, after Haiti, I went and served in Pakistan, as I previously mentioned. So my service in Pakistan was after the Haiti earthquake, and I left U.S. Southern Command. What I found there was working hard to find where Pakistan's common interest overlap with the U.S. common interest was the sweet spot of where we could get something achieved. But as long as the U.S. was asking Pakistan to do something that wasn't completely lined with their interest, we were going to be very frustrated with trying to achieve that.
Yeah, wow. So something else, as you're thinking about both your experience in Haiti and in Pakistan, any other learnings you have as you look back on your career? Or maybe another way to ask it, if you could go back in time and do any of it differently, what would you have done differently?
Well, I think the major thing that I would have done differently was in Haiti, for example, I would have taken, in a couple of cases, I would have taken a little bit more time to think through the problem set and brought a few more stakeholders in that process, where we had more time to think about it, rather than trying to rush to a solution maybe too soon. And there was a balance there, certainly, in terms of when you're trying to accomplish things when people's are suffering and lives are at stake. But I think 3 to 4 weeks after the immediate aftermath of the earthquake, there were some cases where I probably should have shown a little bit more patience in terms of how we were trying to present some solutions to some problems that dealt with where vulnerable communities were at and things of that sort. And whether or not we needed to move them to safer locations because of the upcoming hurricane season. And in Pakistan, I think what I learned most often there is take advantage of the situation you're in at the time you're in your relationship, because things can always get worse. And I was reminded that by General Mattis when I first went to Pakistan, because I arrived in Pakistan about a month after a raid that killed Osama bin Laden. And General Mattis, in my in-brief to him on my way to Pakistan, mentioned something to me. He said, some people are going to tell you our relations with Pakistan can't get any worse because of the circumstances which is unfolded. Don't believe them. They can get worse.
Wow.
And he was right. 6 months later, they did get worse. They got better for a while, but then we had a major incident on the border with Pakistan where over 20 Pakistani soldiers were killed due to an incident where some Afghan U.S. Units that had Afghan soldiers in it actually accidentally fired on some border posts that killed a bunch of Pakistani soldiers. And of course, in the aftermath of that, our relationships got a lot worse. And it took a long time to rebuild that. So what I learned is this element of trust. I think the foundation of leading effectively in crisis is something you and I have talked about a lot. You've talked about it yesterday and or Wednesday in our class with our MBAs, and that is trust. And I love your formula of vulnerability plus authenticity in parentheses times credibility equals trust. And I think that is spot on. And if you can't have a strong foundation of trust, and it can be individual trust, and I found in Pakistan I could establish trust between myself and a Pakistani general officer I was working with, even though their trust of our nation from a policy standpoint may be cracking or eroding. As long as I could have an element of trust with him, we could have a discussion about going forward. And that was something that in the aftermath of that incident along the border with Pakistan that I leaned on heavily. And it was all about, a lot about credibility. As long as I was credible with him, being honest with him, not saying I was going to do things that I couldn't deliver, and not speaking outside of my lane, because I certainly couldn't speak on behalf of the political issues. I could just speak on behalf of what I could do right there in the country, and having enough trust to move forward. And I saw that in Haiti as well. When individuals lost their credibility with folks they were dealing with, they just could not make progress in working with that community or with others. And so I think this idea of how you establish credibility, how you maintain credibility, and how you sort of think about things that you're getting ready to do that may erode credibility with individuals or organizations is going to have a long-term effect that will be really hard to build back.
Yeah, wow. Okay, again, Ken, so much. And I had no idea, too, that you were in Pakistan right after the Osama bin Laden raid. I did not know that was the kind of context in which you were there. So also, very, very sensitive time. So I wanted to take all that experience you've got and all that wisdom and those leadership times that you've had in your life, and for the leaders listening today that are kind of trying to lead their teams, and while it might not be in a tense situation with nations about to go to war or after an earthquake, they still feel some level of crisis because of things going on in the world right now. What are some things, if we sum it up to a couple points, what were some things that would help leaders lead through crisis with their teams now?
First, I would say, you got to be able to lead yourself before you can lead others.
Yeah.
And so this gets to always working to improve your own education, awareness of your strengths, your weaknesses, how to leverage your strengths, and also become more attuned to how to understand others. And that gets to, the component of not just listening to them, but truly hearing what they have to say and understanding where they're coming from. So when I look at teams, whether it be an NBA team or an organization, and they come and say, "Hey, we got dysfunction among the team that we're trying to resolve. Can you help us sort of look at this?" Many times, what I see is folks should look in the mirror first and say, "What can I do to help improve this situation?
Yeah.
What can I do to help the team be a better team?" Rather than lay blame on others or criticize others, is look at yourself first. You have to lead yourself first in order to lead others. Then you need to, the next step is, how do I help others in my organization? So I think, the CEOs and the senior leaders who are leading leaders, it's how are they enabling those leaders to be the best version of themselves. Those leaders need somebody to talk to, particularly in times of crisis. So in the immediacy after a crisis, and we've lived through the pandemic now, I think the most effective leaders I've seen are the ones who pick up the phone or set up a Zoom call and just have a discussion with folks, say, "How are you doing? What's going on? What are your biggest challenges?" And listening to them. Rather than saying, "Hey, I'm looking at the spreadsheet and you're not producing the revenue this month that you did in previous months. What's going on?" Just saying, "Hey, what's going on?
Yeah.
What are the challenges you're facing? How can I help you get through this?" So I think that goes a long way in helping you make the decisions you need to make.
Yeah, that's great, Ken. So just to kind of start to wrap up our conversation here today, so you recently were back in Haiti.
Yes.
So to talk a little bit about that trip. What did you see there that you noticed, and what progress maybe have you seen made since the last time you were there?
Well, unfortunately, Haiti is in a very precarious position, one that they've been through these before, but they've just had their president assassinated here in July. Then they had a significant earthquake here a few weeks ago, and then they had a tropical storm a few days after that earthquake. So they got 3 major blows in different ways in a short period of time. So they're going through some really tough times. As we say, Haiti just can't get a break when it comes to this. I think I had the opportunity to go down with the chairman of the board of the Community Organized Relief Effort, which I've been sitting on the board since I retired from the military. They were one of the first organizations to show up in Haiti after the earthquake, and they stayed there for the last 11 years. It was founded by Sean Penn, and so he asked me to accompany him to Haiti to see what the teams were doing on the ground. And so I was able to do that and spend some time with his organization as well as the Jose Andres' World Central Kitchen, which is doing a dynamic job feeding over 30,000 hot meals a day to the folks in the most vulnerable communities that were devastated the most from this earthquake. But Haiti needs a lot of help. But what I found is that the leaders aren't waiting for that help. I mean, they're stepping up. Even in the political turmoil that Haiti's going through, I was impressed with the Dr. Jerry Chandler, who is the Director General of their Civil Protection Agency, which is our equivalent of FEMA, who really is trying to work with the international community, the U.S. Embassy, all of these NGOs to try to deliver aid. This earthquake occurred about 50 miles west of Port-au-Prince, the capital, which is in a very mountainous area, in the most isolated area of Haiti. And so getting there to deliver this assistance and aid is much more difficult than even what it was in 2010. And also, these communities are not unlike the mountainous regions of where I grew up in eastern Kentucky. There are dirt roads that go over mountains, and so you're going to. They're small communities, and and they don't have a lot of their own infrastructure and their own support, so they're going to be relying upon for a short period of time, certainly, outside agencies to help, and that's what these organizations do. So I was impressed. U.S. military, of course, has got a Joint Task Force Haiti there again, U.S. Southern Command, so they've stepped forward and done so, but you don't hear that in the news. It's over, it's sort of been pushed off the front page by other world events. And so that's the challenge of the context of the environment. So they're going to have to sort of do what they can and get the assistance they can from the UN and other governments there. But I was I was impressed with what the leaders on the ground are doing. And on the day that I left there, Ambassador Samantha Powers, who is the director for USAID in the U.S., was visiting her team that's delivering a lot of this aid. And they're not only doing that, but they're doing it while they're trying to deal with a pandemic in Haiti. And Haiti is far behind in terms of testing and giving the vaccinations that's necessary, which the U.S. government is provided over 500,000 doses of the vaccine and trying to implement that as well.
Wow. So you're right. So it sounds like Haiti really needs a break.
Yeah, they need a break.
Oh, gosh. But I'm glad to hear that people are stepping up, both leaders inside Haiti, and there's other NGOs and other organizations that are trying to get involved and provide that support. Ken, this has been absolutely great. Page of notes. Amazing. It's always great to spend time with you. So I ask all my guests this question. I'm going to ask this question to you. I think I know what you're going to say, but you've surprised me a lot today. So we'll see where this goes. So what's one life hack you have for us on how we can either have better conversations or build better relationships with either people we're working with or even at home?
Well, I think I've mentioned it several times. It's and sometimes this is, I think, I found this to be hard for type A personalities, whether you're, whether you're an extrovert or introvert, there are all kinds of type A personality who want to get things done and act immediately, and that is be a better listener. And I don't just mean listening to people's words, I mean paying attention to them where they're at and occasionally asking how you're doing and how can I help you.
Yeah, that's great. So if people either want to learn more about you, connect with you, where can they go?
Well, they can go to, I'm on LinkedIn, which is where I'm most active, and I try to post on LinkedIn, and I post on Facebook, certainly when I visit places like Haiti, and I run a variety of leadership programs at the Rosetta Business School, as you well know, and I try to always post what my students are doing.
Yeah, great. Ken, always a joy, always a pleasure. Keep up the great work.
Okay, well, thanks. Thanks for having me, Brandon.
I told you that was going to be a great show. Every time I listen to Ken, every time I have him on the show, I always learn something new about him. And I learned a lot of new things about him today. Specifically, I didn't even know he was actually in Haiti when the earthquake happened. He experienced it, and he had a team member killed during the earthquake. So talk about crisis. It was really personal as well as the situation he was in. So Ken gives us a couple really important points. He said the first thing you got to do is you have to learn how to lead yourself. You got to be able to control your emotions. You have to be able to kind of understand your strengths, be able to regulate those. And a lot of that comes with experience, but he says that's the first step. And then he says you've got to really just display empathy in those situations. You've got to reach out to folks, ask how you can help. Don't just start telling them what you're going to do, but really ask how you can help. That's particularly true, Ken reminds us, when you're in contexts or cultures that might be different than yours, when you're in somebody else's backyard, as Ken puts it, whether it's in Louisiana or Haiti or Pakistan, but make sure you connect and learn about those cultures so people can trust you. And then the interesting thing there was he also then pivoted and said, but you still need to give direction and create focus for people. So it's a balance. You got to make sure you're listening and you're showing empathy, but sometimes you also got to step up and set direction and focus people, drive decisions. So he comes, of course, from the Army, and one of the Army's principles is bias for action, and Ken definitely displayed that. He said one of his challenges, as we all have as leaders, is patience. Sometimes he could get impatient, but having people who could help him to manage that was also a big strength. And then he said you got to kind of understand the limitations and constraints of the situation. You maybe can't go at the pace you want it to go. That doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. You just have to learn with what you're working with and how you can kind of work through in that situation. He said, Haiti, those people are very resilient. They've been through this before. They know what they need to do. They just might not have all the resources. So, and then he reminds us also as leaders, we still want to now, naturally, as we want to bring hope into situations, don't ever forget, things can get worse. So you want to make sure that you're trying to manage as best you can and keep your eye on the ball and you're not kind of letting things slip. Finally, I asked Ken, I said, for managers today that feel like they're in a crisis situation or leading through the pandemic, what are some things they can do? And he summed it up nicely by saying, really two things. Lead yourself and seek to understand. Really check in with others. Don't just say you're missing your numbers on the spreadsheet, but really check in with folks. And how many times have we had guests come on the show and talk about those things? But Ken really puts it in context in some of his real world experiences. So I love that show. Every time I have Ken on, I learn something. I hope you did too. I hope this helps strengthen your toolkit. So as you find yourself in crisis, you feel a little more certain on what you can do next. And I definitely know I do.